So it's my pleasure to have with us today Eddie Sarfaty, who is a comedian who I met through Christopher Bram and Draper Shreve years ago now, who's been to Buffalo and performed at Canisius College. And I will always remember Eddie because he visited me once at Kings County Hospital, which was kind of a miserable place when I had an emergency appendectomy. And Eddie's a funny guy, and he made me laugh, and I had like horrible stitches and pain in my abdomen, and he'd laugh. I mean, I laughed the entire time that he visited. I'm grateful for it, but I will never forget that. I don't know if you remember that, but I vividly remember.
Yeah, I mean, I remember visiting you, but I don't really remember what I said, but that's the nature of a lot of organic jokes. They're just in the moment and you move on.
That's absolutely. So you made my otherwise difficult stay at that hospital a bit more enjoyable. So I appreciate that.
Oh, well, you need humor when you're in a difficult situation.
Exactly. So Eddie, if you want to maybe say a few words about yourself and maybe actually also tell us about how you've become the comedian that you've become.
Well, I think you become the comedian you become based on what's happened to you. I think that people in general who are the best comedians are people who've had some kind of profound experience of being an outsider in some way. If you look at all the really great comedians, they're Jewish or they're African American or they're women or they're LGBT or they're fat or they're funny looking. I always joke that there aren't, a whole bunch of, straight Anglo-Saxon Protestant white men who are hilarious, unless they've had some kind of difficult childhood or something. Comedy is very much the domain of the outsider. Whether it's, a personal thing like being funny looking or, over tall or overly short, or if it's culturally, whether you come from a group that's, an outsider in where you grew up. And so for me, I'm Jewish, I'm gay, I was a fat kid.
You're checking off all the boxes.
Yeah. And it just becomes a way to sort of have control over things that you don't have in reality, it's a comfort. And, it takes the narrative away from wherever the narrative's coming from, whether it's society or another person or history. And it's, you become a comedian to cope. There's a lot of emotional baggage involved.
So do you see comedy then as a defense mechanism or has it morphed into something else for you?
Well, I think people who are comedians, very often it develops because it's a defense mechanism. Comedy for the observer, the audience, I think it's an identification, because it's, in some level, we are all the same. We all are human. We all have the same, fears, hopes, dreams, anxieties. And for someone to get up there and give voice to their fears, anxieties, hopes, whatever, forms a connection. I mean, most people don't feel comfortable getting up and, some people don't even tell their wives or husbands their fears or their anxieties, and so if a comedian can connect to an audience and be honest emotionally, then the audience is with them, and then you can lead them somewhere they feel safe, and then you, for the joke, you turn it on its end. And that provides a release. So all of a sudden, you're talking about something that's difficult or very personal or frightening, and you don't make it, you don't go to the gruesome conclusion, you go to the, yeah, but it's still, it's people being able to identify with you. And that no matter who you are, you know, if you're an African-American man from, you know, Detroit, and all of a sudden you're playing to a room full of, you know, Christian white housewives in Atlanta, you know, if you're a good comic, they may not know anything about the specifics of your life, but if you're honest in connecting your fears, your anger, your titillation, your anxieties, then it's a connection. So I think people seek that out, especially when things are difficult. You know, I always say that if there's something that's so horrible that I can't make a joke about it, I don't ever want to know what that is. Does that answer your question?
Yeah. So how, I guess I have a two-part question here.
Sure.
Is comedy then something that you feel you learn, or it's innate? And where is the source for you to be honest? Like how do you develop that?
Well, is comedy innate? I mean, are you asking, you know, I mean, like, are people born, you know, born stand-ups or born performers? I guess some people, you know, some people are more outgoing than others. Some people like the limelight more than others. There's a lot of funny people.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of funny people. We all know, you know, and there's shoe salesmen and doctors and dentists and bus drivers or whatever. And they're funny and they're hilarious often. And, you know, our lives, we're very blessed to have them in our lives. In terms of being a comedian, it's like a different skill set. You know, you get a lot of people who, I teach workshops for people who are interested in having a try at stand-up comedy, because a lot of people, they're funny at parties, or they're crack people up at the water cooler, or they were the class clown, and their friends, or they think, oh, I should do stand-up. And the trick is that when you're with people at a party, you already have an emotional connection to them. Mm-hmm. You know, or if you're, you know, a lot of the times they're your friends or your family. And when you make a joke, it's almost always in response to something someone's just said, or something that's just happened, or it requires you to share knowledge, to have previously shared knowledge with them. But when you're a stand-up, you're on stage and you don't know those people at all. So how do you, and nothing's happened. You know, nothing's happened. You're just on stage. So the thing is, how do you set it up in order to deliver the punchline effectively? Because, you know, brevity is the soul of wit, and the length of the setup is inversely proportional to the power of the punchline. You know, we've all been at parties where someone tells a story and it goes on forever, and by the time they get to the punchline, it's terrible.
Right.
But that's just a skill of doing stand-up. And some people are good at it and some people aren't. Some people who are hilarious with their friends never can quite get that. It's much more studied than the punchline very often, because it requires a lot of, you know, it's when you see a comic who on stage, you know, they've worked on every word, every syllable, every rhythm, everything before they ever bring it up there. Whereas if you're at a party, the punchline is organic and it's in the moment. Anyway, so wait, what was your original question?
Did you learn that skill then, the stand-up skill?
Yeah. I mean, I think you have to learn that skill. You know, we're not used to doing that. You know, if you make a joke about our boss, you don't have to explain to me, oh, he's really weird and he wears this strange clothing and he talks to himself or whatever. So you just make a joke and we automatically know who he is and we can laugh. But if I'm in front of an audience, how do I do that without, just diluting the joke too much?
Mm-hmm.
So you do have to learn that. It's a writing skill, and different comics do it in different ways. But I think that that's not to take away anything from the people in our lives. The brother-in-law who cracks us up, or the guy at the dry cleaners, or whatever. And I think it's necessary. I think it's very human. Comedy is like a little burst of intimacy, that you can't really have any other way. I meet you somewhere in a bar or a party, and we share a joke, and in that little moment of explosion, the laughter, like you're releasing you're knocking down your guard, even if it's just for an instant, and it's like a little bit of sheer joy, and it's revealing, and it's vulnerable, but it's safe. It's not like if I was at a party and just started to tell you about something really serious that happened with me, you would be like, whoa. So it's a place, we're a social species, right? We're designed to be together. We live very unnatural lives, I think. That our technology has vastly outpaced our evolution. Chimps and bonobos and gorillas, they're always together. They're never by themselves. And until like 100 years ago or so, you were never really by yourself. You lived with your parents, and you worked with, you worked on the farm with people, and then you got married and had kids, and then your parents lived with you, and your aunts and uncles all lived nearby, and you were never really alone. And now, you get up in your apartment and you are alone, and then you get on the subway and you listen to your headphones, so you don't talk to people, and you sit at your cubicle and you don't talk to people. You put on your earphones at the gym, you don't talk to people, and you go home. And it's very, it's sad. I mean, I think it's really sad. I think it's really harmful. Something's beeping. I don't know what that is. Is that you?
That's you.
Oh. I don't know, my mother must be burning down the house or something. I think it really is a vital thing for people to be together, and jokes, laughter is one way to do that. And even if it's secondhand through the TV or through people sharing a stupid meme or something. Are we at?
Yeah, no, that's perfect.
Trying to remember where we are.
I want to go back to the social species comment in a minute, but I first want to ask you three other questions.
Sure.
How long do you consider yourself having been a comedian? Not just a funny guy, but a comedian.
Well, I was doing it like, you mean getting up on stage?
Yeah.
I was doing it like half-assed for a number of years, because it's a frightening thing. They say stand up, it's public speaking, and public speaking in all the studies is people's number one fear, more than spiders or plane crashes or whatever. And of course, stand-up comedies, public speaking made even more terrifying. And so I was scared to do it, and sort of, doing it halfway. And then in 2001, I said, I have to do this, and I don't want to be 80 years old regretting that I didn't do this. So I luckily had a gig for the summer lined up, and I quit my job. And so that's like the official date.
What was it that triggered that official switch, or that made you take that leap?
I guess it's just, at some point you're like, you're at a job you're not really crazy about, and you're, at different points. I mean, it's a midlife crisis, but you can have a midlife crisis when you're 22. It's just, you sort of say, when it hurts enough, you make the move. And I just, I started to use a test for decisions, which is what am I likely to regret more? Am I going to regret trying this? Maybe, but then I could always change. Or am I going to regret not trying this? And that just seemed much clearer.
That's a pretty good test, I think, for most decisions.
Yeah.
Was comedy something encouraged in your family? I mean, did you have a social support that encouraged these decisions or behaviors?
Is that on yours? Well, that was fun.
So yeah, about
so you mean in my family?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I mean, no one ever said, "Oh, when you grow up, you're going to be a comic." My parents were always very supportive when I wanted to do creative things. My father was talented at drawing, but he never thought he was good enough to do it. And I have no idea what that is. My mom wasn't particularly creative, but they let us take music lessons, and I went to a summer camp for the arts. I was a drama major in college, and for parents to agree to let you do that, that's like a big thing.
That is.
When I started doing comedy, it was a long time before I ever let my parents come to see me.
Oh, really?
Because, no matter how good you are, no matter how good your material is, you can have a bad day at work.
Mm-hmm.
And I've seen Drew Carey bomb or Jerry Seinfeld flatline. And, that's just part of the thing. And I just had this horrible feeling that my parents are going to come see me. And what if I bomb? They're going to my mother's going to start hinting about law school or something. And luckily I had a great show. And now my dad passed away, but my mom was she's my biggest fan. I came home one time and the guy was fixing the gutters on her house. And she says, "Oh, Eddie, this is John." And I said, "Hi, John." He goes, "Oh, hi, I loved your demo tape." So yeah, they're supportive in that way. Yeah.
So before we transition to more serious topics, I wonder if you've seen the Mrs. Maisel show. And
absolutely, yeah, I've seen it.
Do you feel it's a relatively accurate depiction of the process of comedy?
Well, I mean, yeah, I mean, she's totally, it's much more, to show the hardships of comedy. There are maybe she has a couple of things that don't go well, but then it goes really well. And then it gets really well, get much better. So, in the first season, they showed her husband going to these open mics and struggling. Yeah, I mean, the only way to get good at it is to do it. You can't sit at home and figure out how to do it and then bring it to the stage. It's not like if you're making a painting where you just paint it until it's perfect. You have to put it out there because you never know for 100% whether something's going to work. I mean, as you go on and do it more, you have a better idea of what's going to work, but still you can be completely surprised. So Mrs. Maisel, it's very stylized. I mean, it's almost like a Broadway musical without the music, like the way the costumes are and the camera angles. But yeah, I think it's someone's career condensed into a season, 2 seasons on TV to go from nothing to. But quite frankly, you wouldn't want to watch a comedy series where it was just a year of horrible open mics.
Right. You want it to be good stuff.
Right.
So you mentioned earlier about humans being a social species and the need for social interaction and how that has disintegrated with technology and so forth. But that's also what we're living in even more exacerbated ways.
Yeah, with COVID. Right. So, I mean, I think it's even more important now. Unfortunately, you can't be together. I mean, so if you're very lucky, you're, trapped at home with someone who's hilarious. And I guess in some ways the computer, the internet and, Twitter and TikTok and all those things have some illusion of bringing people closer. So that's helpful. And the fact that we're all facing the same crisis is helpful too, because there's a recognition in a lot of the humor. I mean, whether it's a joke about hoarding toilet paper or a joke about I can't stand my husband because we're stuck together. I mean, people can relate to that.
Right. You don't have to do any explaining. The setup is already universal.
Right. I mean, it's, not that the jokes can't be brilliant. And I think it's scary. I mean, humor makes things that are scary less scary. I tend to be a very dark humor person. And I, even in my act, I do a whole thing about planning my father's funeral and pulling the plug on him and all that stuff, which is really serious. But, and it's not like I don't think it's serious. And, people make jokes about anything. People make a joke about the Holocaust. And, it's not that they don't think the Holocaust was terrible.
Right.
And in some ways it brings it up for discussion. There's a great film by a woman named Pearl Fernstein called The Last Laugh, where she examined humor and the Holocaust. And she interviewed like a lot of people like Mel Brooks and Carl Reiner and Susie Essman and Judy Gold and all these people. And, some people are horrified when someone makes a joke about the Holocaust. Okay, what did you hear?
The horror, the humor at the Holocaust.
Right. I mean, we all know the Holocaust is horrible, but we can make a joke about. You can make a joke about anything that's horrible. It has to be funny, And the thing is, people in today's climate, someone make a joke about something, and people will take offense, and then the joke gets tweeted and posted, and the joke gets, is put into print, where there's no facial expressions, there's no connection, there's no cadence, there's no nuance. So you really don't know if the person who said it was being facetious, ironic, or just silly. And, that's really important. What the source of the joke is, who's saying it, how they're saying it. And I think that, the word police are a little out of control right now, because there's not like a blanket for everything.
Right.
In the film, Fern talks to Holocaust survivors, and many of them talk about how it was such a horrible, surreal experience that things were just funny, that things just stood out. And what do you do, not laugh at it if you're in that horrible situation, to find whatever solace you can? Mm-hmm. Of course, if you're like a neo-Nazi making jokes about it, I tend to not find neo-Nazis particularly funny. Actually, I find interesting, like, those people are never funny. Like, their humor is always really bad. And I always think, okay, there's something about that. If someone, you have to be bright to have a good sense of humor, or just be funny. That's why I think Donald Trump, he's never funny. He's always like, he'll get applause at his rallies, but it's always like anger. It's not like he's making a witty joke. It's a very different thing.
But both of those groups can be the source of something funny, right? I mean, they can.
You mean I could mock them?
Yes.
Oh, yes, definitely. You have to. And what's more horrible than Nazis? Why would you mock them? And it disarms people. Look, I mean, I don't know who's going to be viewing this interview, and there are probably people who are Trump supporters or whatever, but if you think about it, there's nothing that Donald Trump hates more than being laughed at or the fear of being laughed at. So comedy is powerful. Right. Comedy is a very powerful thing. And it brings us together, especially with this, the situation now where we're all feeling isolated, and it's scary. I mean, I live in New York, so it's been scary for a while. I mean, I've had 2 good friends die from coronavirus, and people in other parts of the country where it wasn't so serious, I think it didn't really, it wasn't as big a deal to them, although now that's changing. And, I think they'll start to be funnier about it too. We need it in a crisis. At 9/11, I was on Cape Cod performing with Danny McWilliams and Jaffe Cohen, who and we had a show scheduled that day, and the attacks happened in the morning, and we thought, oh, well, we're going to have to cancel the show. And I went to the theater to say, and the woman said, well, you're already sold out, because people were so desperate for some relief. And it was a great show. I mean, we all had this shawl of seriousness and sorrow on us, but it was healing.
So do you
I'm rambling a lot because we're getting like off the initial questions. I just want to make sure
this is all really good. Do you so sorry, I'm trying to figure out how to formulate this question. Do you feel it's harder to make comedy now because of decontextualization and word policing and so forth?
Well, I was helping Judy Gold on this book that she wrote called Yes, I Can Say That. And the subtitle is When They Come for the Comedians, We're All in Trouble. Mm-hmm. And it's sort of, I kind of think that the word policing, the political correctness, it's kind of goes hand in hand with this sort of anti-intellectualism in some ways. Because I think, it used to be that the right really was offended by comedy. When Lenny Bruce, for those of your viewers who might not know him, he was a comedian in the 60s, and he broke the norms and talked about sex and skewered politicians and talked about things that people weren't supposed to talk about, and in some cases was illegal to talk about on stage. And trying to figure out how to put this in question. I'm losing my mind here. Say your question again.
Oh, the difficulty to do comedy with language policing and.
Oh, yes. So it used to be that the right were the ones who objected because things were too dirty or things were anti-religious or whatever. And now we've come to this point where it's the left as well, that things are not politically correct. And, certainly I don't condone anyone going out there and spewing racism from the stage. That's crazy. But when it comes to the point where you can't tell a joke that has an African-American person in the joke, it seems nuts. There was a comedian, I'm blanking on his name right now, Nimish Patel, who did a show at Columbia University for the students. And he was talking about how he lives in New York, in this area that's, there are a lot of gay people, and there were a lot of trans guys who were African-American, or maybe they were just wearing drag or something. And he said, you know, it really made me realize how being gay is not a choice, because no Black guy in the United States looks in the mirror and says, you have it too easy, you should put on some makeup. And the students cut off his mic and shut him down.
Oh my
and they
God.
said, that's not the type of humor we want here. And the thing was, he wasn't blasting anybody but an oppressive society. But because there was this joke that contained stuff about LGBTQ people and African Americans, that's not our story to tell, is what they said, which was crazy, you know. And so they tweeted at the height of their outrage, and of course that got retweeted. And then this poor guy who told this joke, grilling society, all of a sudden is like losing jobs and getting hate mail and stuff. It's crazy. So it's, you know, we have to trust people to be smart, and that's getting harder and harder.
Yeah, it feels like people don't get the joke because they don't think.
Yeah. And also, again, with that joke, you know, the students there had their reaction, but I'm sure that once it was tweeted, it was easy for people to be outraged.
Right.
Right. Yeah, it's sad. Because comedy, not only does it help us, face difficult things, it lets us see each other as people.
Mm-hmm.
Comedy, it gains sophistication as time goes on. I mean, we wouldn't have like a bunch of, like minstrel show jokes now, because we're all past that. We all know that's not correct, and it's, based in ignorance and hatred and white superiority. But, we are different from each other. And it's okay in comedy to show our differences and laugh at it, as long as we're laughing along with each other and not laughing at each other with the point of diminishing each other. Sometimes stereotypes have basis in fact or in history, like the idea of Jews being cheap or Jews being good with money. Well, that's really an unfortunate stereotype. But if you think about it, Jews were ghettoized. They weren't allowed to participate in most occupations. One of the occupations open to them was lending money, because it was a dirty task for Christians. So they did what they had to do. And of course, if you're forced into that profession, obviously you learn how to do it well, hopefully. And then, so you pass down the things to your kids. And obviously, there were Jewish bankers. I mean, like all the banks, like Lehman Brothers and Warburg and Rothschild, those were people who made success of the circumstances that were given to them. And yet they're the subject of humor and anger, because they're made a success of what they were limited to do.
Right.
A lot of things like that. Now, that doesn't mean you should get up and do cheap Jew jokes to denigrate people, but you could acknowledge it's not like there's no Jewish bankers. there's a comedian that Judy quoted in her book, and I can't remember his name, but he does a bit on political correctness where he says, okay, I'm going to be politically correct. That's right. Like, Black people are never late, and Jews never like a bargain. Japanese people never have camera equipment. Irish people hate to drink, just sort of mocking how ridiculous it's become.
Right.
And I certainly think we can learn a lot from people who are sensitive to other people's, the misjustices that have been perpetuated against other people. But, we all can laugh at each other. And the thing is, if you can show that you laugh at yourself, then people are a little more accepting of you, bringing them into laugh at themselves and each other. And I think that's good.
Right. Have you seen any impact either in general or in your development personally about COVID? Like, has there been, you mentioned like the toilet paper memes and things like that, but I guess I'm wondering if you feel COVID has had an impact yet on comedy, or how you see it impacting the development of comedy.
Well, I think that is it developed? I mean, I don't know that, it's sort of affecting it in the way that any difficult circumstance does. I mean, the jokes right now are more about this common experience, because it's not just like an event that's happened to other people. It's not, the Holocaust that happened to Jews, or, violence that's happened toward people of color. It's some like experience that we're all sharing. I mean, we're all stuck at home. And so a lot of, it's a big common denominator. There's always when there's a tragedy and people start making jokes, there's always that too soon thing. And I think that so far, I haven't really seen a lot of, I can't even think of any COVID humor that's really, really is mocking like suffering. Mm-hmm. I mean, I can't, about, people in oxygen tents or on, intubated. Now that doesn't mean to say that, if I was intubated, my family would be making jokes to get through it, and that's fine. But I think we're all at some level of discomfort now with just having to be at home and having to wear masks when it's hot, and, having to stay 6 feet away, and, not be able to have sex, and, whatever. And that's, in a way, it's great that we're going through it together. There's some cohesiveness. Mm-hmm. And there's anger. There's anger at the bad policies of the administration for not mandating, governors who never close down their states. And now there's these big case increases.
Right.
It remains to be seen whether people go to the really dark stuff.
Right.
And when is too soon? I don't know. It depends.
Well,
it also depends where it's coming from.
Right.
If I'm here with my friend and she knows me and knows like I'm not a mean person, but I like make a joke that's really dark, we can laugh at it because we know it's not like some hate group making a statement. And that's part of the problem with comics on stage. You don't necessarily know who they are or where they're coming from. Except, there are some comics who like Joan Rivers was like that. She could say, quote unquote, mean things, but you knew there was this decent person underneath, so you could accept it.
Right.
Yeah, so I think that
Well,
answers the question.
yeah, it's also interesting to me that, as you said earlier, comedy develops within a social setting of back and forth. And
Right.
so I guess it's interesting to me to think about how comedy is or is not developing in this state of isolation that we've existed in for a couple of months now.
Well, I mean, like when you say developing, like it's going to go up on some new evolutionary branch, or is
Well,
it
I don't know. I
I
mean,
mean, it's just sort of, the human experience applied to this set of circumstances. I mean, because, compared to things that have gone on, the COVID crisis, you know, pales in comparison to a lot of, the Holocaust, the Inquisition, 9/11, your slavery, all that stuff, the bubonic plague. I mean, all those things are, and people dealt with humor to get through that.
right.
Um, it's also a way to get, so it's a defense mechanism. It's a way to bring people together. It's also a really good way to inform people, because people don't want to, as we can see in this crisis, people don't want to hear bad news. They don't want to know, the president doesn't want to hear the numbers. It upsets him. People don't want to be told that they have to wear a mask. But, if when, a stand-up, and actually, since there's no theaters, there's very little stand-up happening, except on late night, Stephen Colbert or Seth Meyers or Trevor Noah or all those people, and Samantha Bee, and people become educated and find out things that they want to tune out because it's made funny and it's not scary to hear it. I mean, more people, apparently the people who watch The Daily Show are more informed than the people who watch CNN. It's like they're more, because they retain more, because it's, and you have people like John Oliver who are doing a real service. He did a great piece on the looming eviction crisis because of this pandemic. And that's serious. I mean, who wants to hear about that? But it's real and we have to be aware of it. And, because he's someone who can connect to people and make things funny, people trust him. They feel at ease. They've shared that little bit of intimacy I'm talking about with him. And so I guess more stuff penetrates than would if you just have someone, demanding that you do something, or someone who's just giving information out without any kind of empathy.
It strikes me that there's some similarity there with academia, where the transition to online, which we all had to do,
right,
depended a lot on the relationships that you could maintain, develop, or morph during that process. And I guess I guess my question about comedies being affected or developing is just from my own experience, that my own teaching has, partly out of necessity, but also longer term, has evolved because of COVID. Now, part of that was I had to go online, but even if I don't have to be fully online, there's things I learned from that will make my other teaching, if we ever go back to face-to-face, different.
Right. It's interesting. I mean, there's definitely, people are getting better at managing, communicating through this technology. One of the things is, I've seen you know, stand up, or like, you know, people had play readings online where, you know, of course it's very forced because the actors are all in different places. Mm-hmm. But it's sort of this weird hybrid. You know, if you're watching a comedian on television, then you have anonymity. Mm-hmm. And if you're watching a comedian in a club, you know, most clubs are very dimly lit and the people are packed in together because it sort of fosters this feeling of safety. And, you know, if people feel too exposed because it's too bright or there's a lot of space around them, they feel inhibited and they might not laugh at something that, you know, can I laugh at that? Is it politically correct? People going to judge me. And with doing things via Zoom, it's sort of this weird thing because it's either like TV where people are watching you and you don't know it and they don't see the other people who are watching, or you see them all. You have like, you know, 100 little squares on your screen and you can see their faces because they're not sitting in the dark with a candle on the table. They're sitting in their kitchen or, you know, whatever. And they maybe can all see each other. So then it's, you know, you're in a comedy club, you're not looking at anyone's face except for the comedians. You're looking at the back of people's heads. So to bridge that, to somehow get that sense of safety, I think is really hard and it's a challenge. So the technology, you know, is there needs to be some better way to do it. I mean, you know, of course, in the future, you'll be like on a holodeck and the audience will, you know, be such an illusion. Or you'll send your avatar to the show or something. I think people can't wait to not have to do this. just because, I mean, comedy in terms of stand-up, it's about the connection. You know, when I have students and I ask them, what's the most important part of a joke? And they'll say, oh, the punchline. And yes, the punchline is very important, you know, and then when I say, no, I don't think so, they'll say, oh, well, then the setup. And yeah, well, the setup is very important too. But I think, and people will disagree with me, comics will, I'm sure, disagree with me, is that it's the reason you're telling the joke. You know, I'll say, why are you telling the joke? And someone will say, oh, because it's really funny. And I don't think that's a good enough reason. I think it's because you're sharing, you know, and whether if you're joking about, you know, your mother makes you crazy, then you're sharing your anxiety. And they might not know your mother. They may have wonderful mothers who've never in a day in their life given them any kind of grief, but they've had anxiety about something. So if they can feel your anxiety, then you can connect with them. I think that's what people want. So I think people are really anxious to get this screen, you know, out of the middle. And especially just aside from comedy, just person to person. You know, and it worries me a little bit that'll become enough of a substitute for some people that they don't really understand. Just like, you know, just like the technology's replaced the connection. You know, you could sit all day on your computer and talk to 100 people and never really have a connection with them. You're just interacting with a screen. And, you know, so people feel lonely. People feel disconnected because you are disconnected. And I think but yet we do it. Yet it's more and more that we're doing that. You know, it wasn't just that you had to be able to talk to them at work. Now you have to be able to talk to them on your watch and see them, you know, right. You know, see them on this screen or earphone. And I think if we start to think that there's an okay way to experience comedy, like, you know, it should be okay in a bad situation, you know, when there's an emergency. You know, I mean, it's sort of like there was a big, you know, when when Comedy Central started, like 24-hour cables, all of a sudden, oh, there's the Comedy Channel, and people, you know, oh, it's a Comedy Channel, and then people could see these comics coming through their living room all day, and so, oh, well, I don't need to go to a comedy club.
Right.
And then eventually, in the last few years, there was sort of this resurgence because the connection is so needed. Now, I hope that it doesn't become like where comedians are never going to have to leave their house to entertain an audience. I mean, think about it. I could have a show where, you know, 100 people can come, but I could do a show here where 10,000 people could come. It's just easy. They just have to click a button. They don't have to buy tickets and get dressed and go out. Yeah. So in some ways, that's kind of tempting, you know, to sell 10,000 tickets. But I think I'm hopeful that it'll turn out that people will eventually realize it's not enough.
Right. They use the human interaction.
Right, and especially in, you know, there's a book in my, I gave you the link to it, a book called Jokes by this guy, Ted Cohen, who was, he was a professor at the University of Chicago. And he talks about the function of jokes in society. Like I was talking before, how you're like in a bar and you share a joke and everyone laughs, and that, you know, one person could be an immigrant from South America, one person can be an African American who's descended from slaves, one could be like, you know, a Jewish doctor from New York or whatever, and all of a sudden you're all human because you're all laughing at something. And in our country, where people are so different from each other, we need that. You know, we need people to connect, and you know, and of course with social media, it's easy for people not to connect. It's easy for people like Red America and Blue America to hate each other. When, you know, it's easy to forget that those are people who worry about paying their bills and who love their children and who, you know, want the world to be safe. And, you know, it's easy to forget that. And if that barrier is there, and if that barrier is there in terms of people exchanging jokes, then it makes them less powerful. And I think it's really bad for the society and for our country in particular, where it's, you know, such a pluralistic place.
I hadn't really thought of that, but that makes a lot of sense. The function of comedy on a social level, not just the social interaction, but on a sort of bridging.
It's cohesive.
Yeah.
It's cohesive. Yeah.
I hadn't really thought of comedy that way, but that makes a lot of sense.
Right, and it lets you see the other person. You know, if you're, you know, if you're an Asian person doing stand-up comedy, you talk about your alienation and your difficulty in your neighborhood and stuff. Well, you know, the Jewish kid growing up in the Catholic school, or the, you know, the African American kid growing up in a stressful situation, then you can understand each other more.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, and I've noticed, the thing I noticed about the COVID was the amount of humor, mostly of memes or TikTok nature.
Yeah.
That just regular people were posting. Particularly, the funniest things to me came from places like Italy or Spain that it's experienced the worst of it early on. And it was, right. And I thought of it as, I mean, you know, granted, so they weren't in English, but they were just really quite funny approaches to making sense of a really scary, difficult situation. And I just
right.
thought it was so interesting.
And we're all going through the same scary thing,
right.
You know, which is in some way, hopefully that, you know, more cohesion will come out of it, more understanding will come out of it. You know, it's like, you know, I mean, World War II was horrible, but one of the things is we all had this common thing we're working to figure out. You know, and hopefully that will, you know, hopefully that will happen here. It's unfortunate that, you know, there is like this weird division that that public health has been politicized. I mean, you know, it's great. Like, you know, you can't make me wear a mask. You're stepping on my rights. I mean, it's completely insane.
Yeah.
You know, and maybe it, you know, it takes people to be really challenged for, but, you know, comedy is tragedy plus time. Mm-hmm. So, you know, hopefully some laughs will come out of it. So otherwise we're all fucked.
That's so true. So I have kind of just two more questions for you. So given that you're professionally a comedian, but you've not been able to do shows, what have you done with your time? How have you spent your time in quarantine?
Well, I mean, I've been writing, working on a book, which is not comedic, which is kind of fun. You know, there's not so much pressure that every line has to be funny. You know, I'm doing little art projects. I have some comedy stuff I've been working on. Someone gave me a ukulele. I thought, oh, maybe try to learn how to play that. You know, one of the things that makes good comedians is that you have to be sort of an interesting person. You can't just be somebody who just is making jokes all the time for the sake of making jokes. It's, you know, it's like what I said, why are you telling me a joke? Because it's funny. Yes, I mean, there are certainly times when that's fine. I don't think it's the best reason to tell a joke. I think it's got to have some kind of, you know, but a lot of times you don't even think about that. Jokes happen organically out of your frustration or your excitement. You know, I mean, I'm funny with my friends. I'm funny with my family. I don't know, sometimes I just make myself laugh. Right. You know, I mean, I miss that I can't get up on stage and do it, but, you know, it's not like my whole life. Right. I mean, it's very integrated, interlaced in everything. I mean, even when I'm writing about something horrible, my mind automatically goes there.
So this book that you're working on, do you want to say anything about what it's like or what it's about?
Well, actually, it's you know, it's a 3 generations of a family: a woman, her daughter, and her grandson, and they each have a very profound experience of being an outsider in the immediate family that they're born into. So, you know, it starts off with the woman. She's 16 years old. It's the Nazis have invaded Poland. She's Jewish. Her family, they're all very traditionally dark and Semitic looking, but she has blonde hair and blue eyes. So that all of a sudden she's in this place where she seriously is having a, you know, a profoundly different experience from the people that she loves and that she's closest with. So that's, you know, and certainly comedy can come out of that. And I'm not saying there are no funny things that happen, but I mean, it's also very serious. You know, comedy comes out of very serious stuff. And then the daughter and the grandson also have experiences, but different, very different ones. So I'm excited. I mean, it's fun to do something a little different.
Well, good luck with that. And
thank you.
Hope that it gets published and we can read it one of these days, not too soon.
I hope so too, because you know, I'd hate to think I'm doing this just for the hell of it.
Well, once it's published, we can have you back up to Canisius and you can.
That would be great. That'd be great.
So have you developed any COVID-related jokes? Or are you just sort of thinking about it, or is it?
You know, it's sometimes I post things on Facebook. You know, I'll like come up with stuff, and of course, I remember I posted something and you said, oh, are you going to talk about this? And now I can't for the life of me even remember what it was.
I can't either now, but I remember you posted something that made me laugh, and I was like, oh, perfect.
Right. You know, because it's, you know, in response to the political stuff, or, oh my gosh, I can't even remember. Right. But people could friend me on Facebook and find out.
There you go. There you go. You are funny on Facebook. Well, Eddie, this has been a real pleasure for me.
Yeah, thank you. It's been fun.
Yeah.
Thanks for asking me to do this. If you need any other, if you have questions, people can email me through my website at keeplaughing.com if they have questions or
perfect.
want to tell me a joke.
And
I'm sorry for the beeping. I don't know.
Yeah, what is that?
Cooking a turkey or something. I don't know what it is.
And there was a train sound, a little choo-choo train sound a little while ago.
Oh, I don't know what that is. There's no train here.
It adds to the sophistication of our lives.
Yeah.
But, well, it's fun, Eddie.
Yeah, thanks so much. Stay safe and keep laughing.